Thank you, Virginia. All right, I am like kind of short, so I might just barely be able to see over this podium. I'm really happy that you guys are joining us today. I'm Erin Sutherland, like Virginia mentioned. I've been with the organization about 3 years. I'm based out of Bellingham now, so I'm happy to be here today. Let's get started. All right, so a little bit of overview of what we'll be discussing today. Going to give a little bit more background about the Pipeline Safety Trust and the work that we're doing. Talk a little bit about why you should participate in pipeline safety, where you can do that, and how. All right. So a little bit more about the Pipeline Safety Trust. I know that Clayton gave you a bit of a primer about where we come from. We're a nonprofit watchdog of the pipeline industry and its regulators. We are a growing organization. Traditionally, we had only 2 to 3 staff, and now we have about 10. Yeah, it's great. Thank you. We have staff across the country. We've got Virginia here in Louisiana. We've got staff in Virginia, Washington, and now Wisconsin, a small town in Wisconsin. Our staffer took the train all the way from La Crosse to Louisiana to be here today. We have also been able to expand our areas of focus because of our increased staff and because of new needs for pipeline safety. So we're now focusing on carbon dioxide pipelines, hydrogen pipelines. There's new commodities being proposed, like renewable natural gas, so we're working in those areas as well. We're also able to do quite a bit more state and local work. We have a staffer that is dedicated to state pipeline safety matters. And then we also have a community engagement manager, Virginia, now. We have the technical and data program, which is headed by Clayton. We have a data manager. And then we have a whole policy department now. So a little bit about our community engagement work. Our goal with this program is to help educate you so you can work on your own behalf to advance pipeline safety in your community. And the way that we achieve that is by developing resources. I see that you guys have some at your tables. I'm really grateful to see that. We put on events like this one and trainings. And then for empowerment, we put together guides such as how to submit a public comment. We have something called Contact Us on our website where you can write in questions or figure out where you can get help on certain pipeline safety issues. And then we also have something called the Right-of-Way Roundup. It's abbreviated here as ROW Roundup. Which is a daily news compilation about pipeline safety issues, and it allows members of it, to discuss those issues as well. And we also put out a newsletter once a month or so, and we do some intermittent additional ones when we have big events coming up, like our conference. So our new technical and data team, I like to think of this team as empowering our work. So they inform and support all of the work that the Pipeline Safety Trust does, whether that's policy work or the community engagement work. And they also help us voice the public perspective of pipeline safety in scenarios that we weren't able to do before. So in standards development and in research, oftentimes these standards are being developed by organizations where everybody in the room is associated with an operator, and Pipeline Safety Trust might be the only person in that room that represents that public voice. So we're really proud of our work there. We also believe that this program helps increase transparency, accessibility, and accountability. One of the ways that we do that is with our State of Pipeline Safety blog. You can see this little tiny excerpt from our website here. We do a little write-up of how each state is doing in a given time frame about for their incidents in that time frame. We also put out lots of really interesting assessments of pipeline safety statistics, and we just hired a new person on this, so she's going to have a new perspective and be able to present the data in a new and exciting way. We also put out visualizations that help the public better understand the state of pipeline safety. We also have our policy department. In this department, we also feel that we're voicing the public perspective of pipeline safety in the legislative, regulatory, and legal contexts. You can see our executive director, Bill Karam, here testifying before Congress. And this program is multi-level. We traditionally largely worked at the federal level, but now we're able to work at the state and local level as well. And like I said before, we can participate in these avenues where no public voices exist, and we really hope that you trust us in being able to advance your interests. And relevant to this presentation, we hope to aid the public in participating in public processes relating to pipeline safety. So bringing up this stool again, I was really excited to see that Rich had this in his presentation. Our former executive director, Carl Weimer, loved this analogy and would use it in almost all of his presentations. The way that I like to think about it is that you can't have a functional stool without all three of its legs. And if one of these legs is not participating in good faith in pipeline safety, then obviously the stool can't stand. And then I was talking to my colleague Clayton, and he reminded me that all of the work kind of happens on the top of the stool where all of the constituents come together. So I think it's really important that we keep that in mind today in this room and then in the conference tomorrow and Friday. We all want the same thing, pipeline safety, and we need all three legs to achieve that. So a little bit about being engaged on pipeline safety. One of the things that I was speaking with Virginia about in preparing this presentation is that members of the public are often coming from a bunch of different situations, and there are a bunch of different paths that you could take, and that it really varies depending on that issue, your values, and what kind of stakeholder you are. So the path that you might choose might be different depending on the commodity that you're interested in advocating around, new pipelines, existing pipelines. We think it's really important that when you're hoping to advocate for your community or on a specific issue, you take the step back and really think about what is your problem? What are you hoping to address? And that way you can take steps that are going to help advance your interests, and so that you can find collaborators in your work as well. So let's see. Who you can participate really is, it's really important to consider this question, I believe, because we've got power at lots of different levels. You've got, just a reminder, the legislative branch of our government, the executive branch, which contains those administrative agencies that Bill was talking about, and the judicial branch. You've got operators, media, and then you can engage with the public. And each of these different people or bodies can give you different outcomes. The other thing to remember is that you might, in stepping back, you want to consider who the right person to talk to is, because you might bring the problem to the wrong person, and you don't want to lose steam on getting your questions answered or solving your problem. It can be really frustrating for you, and it's a waste of your time. So stepping back and doing that research to your is really important. So just another reminder about our government branches. You might be wondering, like, I want to pass a law. You're talking about the legislative branch. I want to figure out what regulations apply. That's the regulatory branch. And then the legal branch ensures our accountability and resolves disputes among folks. So you might be wondering, like, where, who, you saw Bill's presentation, you're like, this is really, really complex. There's these state actors, there's federal actors, there's local, there's all of these different agencies, PHMSA, FERC, EPA, state regulators. I didn't even think of DOI when Ed was speaking earlier. So we also have lots of different topics that are at issue with pipeline safety. So there's the safety standards themselves that PHMSA covers. There's land use issues, environmental issues. We recommend that you spend time to figure out who and where to go with your problem, and so that you can choose the right tools to advance your interests. And something to consider here is that the power of your feedback can really vary depending on who your audience is. And I think here it's really exciting to see lots of people from all of these different communities that can potentially influence lots of local governments and state governments and like really have an outsized voice in pipeline safety. So I'm gonna do a little bit of a focus on federal just because that tends to be my expertise. But a lot of these federal doctrines kind of apply at the state level using state level law. So it'll kind of give you a primer, but then you can figure out how that might apply at the state level if that's the avenue or the path that you end up choosing. So there's something called the Administrative Procedure Act. This is the governing law on how federal agencies interact with themselves and the public. And you might remember Bill referencing rulemaking. It governs the rules behind notice and comment. We're going to do an example about that after this. It governs something called adjudication, which is how the government kind of enforces against operators in this context. It also covers judicial review of agency actions, so that legal context. And then it also requires a degree of public transparency and process. And I remember that there was a question about FOIA in the advanced Q&A. I'm not going to cover that in detail here, but I will say FOIA is another public transparency law that you can use to get information from the federal government. I've had varying success with using its processes, and the question also referred to the reading rooms. That's a new requirement under the FOIA amendments of 2007, I believe, that requires government to more proactively post information on something called a reading room on their website. So if you're ever looking for information about how the government is interacting with operators, that might be an interesting place to start. And if you have questions about that, I'd be happy to give you a little tutorial after this presentation. Okay. So you guys might be wondering, like, how can I participate and what does the APA really have to do with that? The APA governs all of these processes to an extent. And then you might have rights that are derived out of the APA. For example, in rulemaking, you have the right of notice and comment. In PHMSA context, in particular, under special permits are noticed, and you can comment on those. They also engage in something called information collection activities. You can comment on those and give your perspective on how the agency might improve its information collection activities. And then, like I mentioned before, adjudication, you don't really have a role per se as a member of the public, but there's a transparency aspect in adjudication. So you can see if the government takes enforcement action against an operator. You can go onto the Enforcement Transparency website, you can see what actions have been taken, and you can, perhaps advocate for greater enforcement to take place. And then I have here another context in which you can participate, but it's not governed by the APA because it's not what is described as like a final agency action. A request for interpretation is something that an operator can submit to PHMSA asking, hey, we don't really understand how to interpret the regulations here. Can you give us your best interpretation of that? And PHMSA actually just decided to allow members of the public and operators to comment on those requests. So it might be an interesting opportunity for you to, give your perspective on that. All right, so here's our hypothetical. PHMSA has proposed a rule. You might be wondering, how do I even know PHMSA has proposed a rule, or even an agency has proposed a rule? What are the different stages in rulemaking? What can you do? Where do you do that, and how can you be effective? And I have a little screenshot here of our, oh no, can you guys see that? Yeah, our guide to pipeline safety rulemaking. It's a little out of date, but I would say it stands. It's pretty good. We're planning on updating it. That'll give you the real lowdown on how the rulemaking process works. But this this presentation is consistent with that guide. So if you want more information, we can always provide this resource to you. So the basic stages of a rulemaking. There's the advance notice of proposed rulemaking. This is an agency asking the public and constituents, we're thinking about regulating here. How should we do that? Do you have ideas? You might have seen under the Trump administration that they were looking for ways to deregulate. Agencies don't have to use the ANPRM process, but it can be a really interesting way for them to engage with the public before they formulate what they want to see in a rule. The next stage is the NPRM, and sometimes you might see this referred to as a NOPR, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. And this is where, like Bill said, the agency has an idea, they're putting it out there, and they'll open it up for public comment. And I have a little typo here. The next step is the Standards Advisory Committees. They have a much longer name. I reference it later. I can never remember it. But that's you might know the LPAC and GPAC. And these are committees that review PHMSA rulemakings for their technical and economic feasibility. And this is unique to PHMSA. So that's after the NPRM happens. Goes through Office of Management and Budget Review. They kind of get to put their stamp on it. You can also comment or you can meet with them. And then it goes to the final rule stage where it's published with the actual text of the rule and all the rationale. So stepping back, how do you know? This is the Federal Register that Bill was referencing earlier. This is the landing page. I've kind of highlighted some of the interesting parts for you. You can register on My Federal Register. This thing doesn't work very well, I'm sorry. So where that arrow is pointing, you can sign up to get alerts about things that you're interested in. You'll get emails every day as it's being published, and you could do keywords, you could do, I'm interested in PHMSA, I want to get everything that PHMSA publishes, or EPA, any federal agency. And then you can see here there's the current issue and the public inspection documents. Current issue is, what was actually published. Public inspection is kind of goofy, I think. It's, I always think of it as like an advanced notice. Sometimes they have something put out in the public inspection, and then, the next day it's put in the current issue, or maybe it'll be a week or two. Or I've had a situation where it was a month between the public inspection and the current issue. And you can kind of compare the two versions. Usually there's not anything too substantially different. So if you're starting from zero, like if you haven't signed up for My Federal Register, you can use the search bar. I don't really recommend it. It doesn't really work. I would recommend browsing, looking for the agency that you're interested in, then navigating from there. It'll send you, if you search, it'll send you stuff from the year I was born, and you don't really care about the 90s. So there's your landing page. Here's what is referred to as notice. So you might hear notice and comment rulemaking. This is the notice in the Federal Register. You can see there's a submit a public comment button. There's references here to where it's going to be found in the Code of Federal Regulations when it's finalized, and a docket number. All of that information is really important because you have to navigate between the Federal Register and where you actually submit your comments on regulations.gov. So this is an actual rulemaking notice that PHMSA put out a while back. I grabbed a screenshot of it so that you could kind of see what that looks like on the Federal Register website. You might also sometimes see something that looks like this. That's what Bill was referencing earlier when he said, this is a real publication. It gets printed out in a book. And you can see this is the same notice. Up there in that top right, that's that page number that we were talking about. Like sometimes it's like 1 million page numbers. And you can see at the top too, volume 90. And you'll sometimes see a citation where it's like 90 FR 38429. That's the home page for this rulemaking. Some other helpful information that you'll find here are the deadline for submitting a comment on this rulemaking and where to submit those comments. And there's also usually a contact person for that rulemaking at the agency. I've had mixed success with contacting that person. So, if you have any questions and it's a pipeline safety rulemaking, you could always reach out to us. We could try to help out. But you'll note that it refers you to regulation.gov. This is how you can participate in pipeline safety. You can submit a comment on regulations.gov. This is the landing page. As you can see, it's currently advertising how to deregulate, which is fun. I also don't recommend really using the search bar here unless you already know the docket number. Sometimes even when you search the docket number, it'll take you to just a random document that references the document number, which is really exciting. But if you, usually the way that I've found the most success is you type in that docket number into the search bar, and instead of hitting search, hit dockets, and it'll take you, hopefully, I can't guarantee it, to the relevant docket. Here is that rulemaking's docket, the one that we were talking about before. I grabbed this, I think, after the comment period closed, so that comment is a little bit grayed out, but you would click that to submit the comment. I like to make sure, triple check that docket number right there. And then you'll see on this notice that it has a lot of the same information that you saw in that Federal Register notice. So I think sometimes it can be confusing. Am I on the Federal Register? Am I on regulations.gov? Because I'm seeing similar but not quite the same information. Just remember that Federal Register is where they give you the notice, and regulations.gov is where you comment. So if you click that comment button, you can submit a comment. I'll do a little, maybe I put this out of order. I'm going to do how to submit a comment. But some helpful things to include are that very exciting docket number that I mentioned earlier. Your perspective, I think, is really important in the federal, at the federal level. And I'll say that because the federal government doesn't know a lot about what's going on at the state and local level and what's going on in your community and how its rules are affecting you. So your perspective is really important during these federal rulemakings. You should give specific policy recommendations, maybe amendments that you really want to see. Like you could cross out regulatory text and put in new ideas. It's really helpful to provide evidence or rationale, research to support your position, and then be responsive to the specific questions or topics. You don't want to have PHMSA discount your perspective because they think, oh, this doesn't have anything to do with what we're rulemaking on right now. which is infuriating, but, we've got to keep it narrow at times. Keep it simple, and a reminder, these are public comments. They are submitted online with your information if you include it on there. So if you want to submit anonymously, don't include your name. If you have your contact information, that'll be put online. I've had people contact me based off of my regulations.gov comment, and it was okay, but if you don't want that, don't put your contact information. So how to submit your comment. This is what it looks like when you click on that button right there. Yeah, the comment period had closed on that one, so this is a screenshot for a different docket, but you'll see here there's a little comment spot. You can, if you don't want to write your comment in that little tiny spot and see it's character limited, I always just write, please see attached for a comment submitted on behalf of the Pipeline Safety Trust. And you can see below there's an area for you to attach your comment. So if you prefer, I like to submit a PDF. I don't want anybody messing with my Word document. And this one is new. I've never noticed this. What's your comment about? You can select your category. I don't remember that being there, but it looks like it's an optional comment or an optional answer, so you could include it. And then one thing that I like to do is always include my email address. That way you can get a confirmation that your comment was submitted. And then they ask you a couple questions about identifying yourself. Are you an individual? Do you represent an interest group? And one thing that I would keep in mind when you're answering these or when you're submitting your comment is, as an individual, PHMSA might sometimes discount your perspective, but anytime you can provide that unique perspective in there, PHMSA should respond to it in the final rulemaking. And of course, you have to prove that you're not a robot now, because that's the future that we are in. Next, the rule goes through these technical pipeline safety standards advisory committees. They are a mouthful. These are committees that are unique to PHMSA that review rulemakings. Here's a little screenshot from a public meeting that was recently put on by LPAC. We are going to do a panel about this later at the conference, so I welcome you to join. We actually have a speaker from that here today. And at these meetings, they discuss the technical feasibility of the rule. They discuss whether it's economically feasible, whether it's in line with the mission, etc. Mixed positions about whether they're effective, whether they're overrun by industry. So come to our panel tomorrow, I think, to discuss that. And then you can comment during GPAC and LPAC meetings. You can attend the meeting in person and literally speak on the microphone in front of everybody about it. Or now they have dockets as well. And they're going to start doing more virtual participation as well. So I encourage you to consider if this might be an avenue for you to participate. Like I mentioned before, the rule goes to the Office of Management and Budget. You might see this referred to as EO 12866 review. This is an executive order that requires that all rulemakings go through OMB. I thought that I was getting close, but you never gave me a warning. Don't worry, I'm almost done. And you can meet with them. It's a really weird meeting. Usually it's just a phone call and you're just kind of chit-chatting and they don't really respond to you, and you tell them what you want to see in the final rule. Then the rule becomes final upon publication in the Federal Register. It includes the effective date, and sometimes there's actually another comment period. And something to keep in mind is, when is my comment going to be most effective? Is it going to be most effective at the ANPRM stage or the NPRM stage? Probably. But you can still give your perspective in the final rule. So, if you're thinking about how you might engage, consider all of those options. And then I think I've got 2 more slides. Like I mentioned before, state and local government processes are often pretty similar to these APA processes. You might have a state level APA, so you might have similar rights to submit comments and to have public transparency. Just keep that in mind as you're working on state and local stuff. And then to wrap up, like I mentioned before, really important, consider your path early. Think about what steps might be the best steps to advance your position. There are these rules that control administrative processes. It's not random, although sometimes it might seem that way. And then you can make a really big difference in pipeline safety by voicing your perspective. So thank you, everyone. Sorry if I went a little bit over. All right.